Traditionally, when we talk about the story of Jesus' transfiguration, the story we just read, we talk about Jesus, right? That seems to be the focus of every telling and sermon I've ever heard on the transfiguration. We read this story to place Jesus within the long line of the prophets of God, alongside Moses and Elijah. We read this story as a statement of Jesus' divinity. We read this story as a reminder of Jesus' relationship with God the Father. And while these are all important points about Jesus and a special place in the cosmos and in salvation history, there's another person or persons I want to focus on tonight. Yes, Jesus is transformed. We know that, but so too are the disciples. St. Matthew writes, Peter, James, and John went up with Jesus to the top of a mountain. And while there, Jesus was transformed. Jesus glowed a brilliant white, and his face shone like the sun. And Moses and Elijah, the two most important prophets in the Old Testament, they show up too to confirm the specialness of this Jesus moment. And God's voice from the clouds proclaims that this shining Jesus is God's own Son, God's beloved. While this familiar scene is taking place, I must ask, this is what I asked, where are those disciples? What are they up to? It turns out that while all this was taking place, they had fallen down. They had fallen to the ground, overcome with awe. Perhaps their knees just gave out. Or perhaps they were overcome with bewilderment. They had no idea what was going on. They lost their balance. They toppled over. Or perhaps they were overcome with fear. Perhaps they tripped over a rock or a root and found themselves lying face down in the dirt. Most likely it was the weight and magnitude of what they were experiencing that overwhelmed them until they could no longer stand. And it's in their falling that they're transformed. Because what does falling feel like? What does it mean? What does it feel like to be picked up again? Think of a time when you've stumbled and fell. Think of a time when you were flat on your back. Think of a time when someone or something knocked you down when you fell. Did someone pick you up? What did that feel like? When I think of falling down and being picked up, I'm immediately transported back to childhood. You know, when I was a boy, I don't think I fell any more than the next kid who ran around, played with friends, jumped around the backyard. But when I did fall, as a child, it always caused a stir. You see, I had this really bad habit as a child. When I fell down, I stopped breathing. To this day, I can't tell you exactly why this happened, but it did. I have these vivid memories. I would fall down, I'd land on the ground, and the wind would go out of me, and no matter how much I struggled, I couldn't get it back. My breaths were replaced by heavy sobs, and all my breaths seemed to be exhales rather than inhales, like I forgot how to breathe. Panic would, of course, set in, and things would get worse. My head would get dizzy, my hearing would become muffled, my vision would blur, and I would just lie on the ground helpless. There are many moments in my childhood that right, like all of us, that are just kind of lost, right, to the sands of time. There's so many things I can't remember doing that my parents say, oh yeah, we did that. No recollection. But these falling down moments, they are just stuck in my mind with crystal clarity. I remember the feeling of falling. I remember the feeling of not being able to breathe. also remember the feeling when someone, usually my mom or my dad, they would run over and pick me up, scooping me up in their arms, rubbing my back, drying my tears, and slowly just reminding me how to breathe. To this day, my dad, he'll retell the story of what was the scariest day of his parenting life. It was a winter evening, probably around this time of year. I was in elementary school and we had the day off because it snowed. And my dad got home for work in the evening and we put on our snow pants and our hats and our mittens and we took our sleds and went to the park. The sledding was fantastic. Perhaps the sledding was too good and the hill was too steep because on this one run I really got a good jump, right? I flung myself down the hill. I gained a lot of speed, too much speed, and I kept going, and I kept going, and I kept going. I was going too fast to jump off. I went down the hill, crossed the road, and wham! I ran right into a metal jungle gym. My dad, he sees this happen, probably in slow motion, and he rushes down the hill as fast as he could. And meanwhile, I was just laying there, not making a sound. And that silence, my dad says, that's all he could hear. He rushed faster, and as he got to me, he realized something. He realized that I was sprawled out in the snow underneath the jungle gym, but I was doing that thing again, right, where I was crying so hard I couldn't breathe. No sound could get out. And he did as fathers do. I remember this. He reached down, he scooped me up, quieted my cries, he helped me breathe, and then he walked me home in his arms. And when I think about getting picked up, that's the story that I think about. Because I don't fall to the ground much these days. Maybe I live a safer life. Maybe I am steadier on my feet than I was as a child. Perhaps I just have less fun and I take less risks. Maybe that's why. You know, and starting in middle school or high school, when I fell down, even those times, and got hurt, I could still breathe. Perhaps I'd grown out of it for good. Or perhaps as I've gotten older and left childhood, entered adolescence, and early adulthood and adulthood, maybe those falls, maybe they just look a little different. And they feel a little different too. I mean, sure, there's the occasional time to go sledding, we trip over the dog, we slip on something that's spilled in the kitchen, but these days, the falls that I take, things that make me lose my breath, look more like Peter and James and John and his disciples on the mountain than they do that little boy on the sled. When I fall down and I feel breathless, it's less from impact and more from a feeling that's weighing me down. It causes me to stumble and fall these days is like what happened to the disciples. Instead of an acute injury or running into a jungle gym, it's usually from a circumstance that makes me afraid. Something that causes me to stumble. Right? Anxiety at work, stress over money, worrying about having a child, insecurity over things happening in the world that just feel beyond my control or anything I can do. I think we all have them, right? Exhaustion from illness, pain from surgery, the burden of caring for loved ones, effects of aging. These are the types of falling that I experience and the ones that I see people in our congregation experience too. Because no matter how scary it is when a child falls, we know what to do when that happens. Right? We run over and we scoop them up and we tell them it'll be all right. We rub their back and we dry their eyes and we hold them close. But when we grow up a little bit, when kisses and band-aids and bright green casts on our arms no longer fix our falls, who picks us up then? When life is more like a metaphorical runaway sled ride and not an actual one, who runs down the hill to meet us? I think the story of the Transfiguration has something to say about that. And hopefully, like Jesus, like the disciples, we can allow this divine encounter, this transfiguration, to transform our lives and help pick us up when we fall. When Peter, James, and John fall, what does Jesus do? Jesus comes over to them, walks right down to them, and he reaches out to them, touches them, and says, "Get up. Do not be afraid." And in our story, the disciples get up, they look around, realize there's nothing to be afraid of, and they walk down the mountain. An amazing thing happens in this story is when the disciples fall. I think it's just amazing. It goes by so quickly, it's easy to miss. But what does Jesus do? Jesus extends his loving arms to them. The same arms that healed the sick, that broke bread, that embraced the downtrodden, the ones that were extended on the cross, those arms, they reached down to meet those disciples on the ground, transforming their fear, calming their breath, and lifting them up in a way that they could never do on their own. Jesus reached down to embrace them, scooped them up in his arms, and he spoke the words that parents speak to children, and those we all probably still need to hear. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I am with you. Do not be afraid. We all fall. All of us. Do not be afraid. No one can do this on their own. And when God picks you up, and you yourself feel a little bit of that transfiguration, do as the disciples did, and don't forget to go down the mountain. Go down the mountain and meet all the people who are stuck under their own jungle gyms, and extend those same arms of Jesus that reached down and scooped you up, quieted your cries, helped you breathe. The same arms that held you and walked you home. Amen.